So, hello and welcome everybody to another Sacred Wisdom podcast. In this podcast today, we are going to talk about the star forts and the piezoelectric effects that they created or supposedly created at one point or one stage. Now, there are over 1,700 star forts around the world in 100 countries, and these all have very similar designs. And it's very likely these sacred geometry type designs were once built on Earth nodes and ley lines. But we're going to look into this further today, and I'm joined with my amazing brother Stephen Denman again today. So hello, Stephen.
Hi, Zach. I hope all's well with you.
All is good, my brother. Yes. So look, first and foremost, I'm sure people watching know about star forts and the sacred geometry designs of these places, but describe to people what a piezoelectric effect is and what actually could have been going on with these star forts at one stage.
Okay, so you got the phrase there, piezoelectric effect. You could also use the phrase piezoelectric current. So when it comes to piezoelectrical transmission and reception, what you're looking at is the accumulation of a steady amount of electricity within solid objects. And these can include obviously different crystallic materials or substances, ceramics, and specific types of rocks or stones that have a high crystalline type content.
So how was this effect being created? Was it because obviously these star forts, most of these star forts are built out at sea, right?
Yes,
Or
right.
next to the sea. So what
Or
was going on?
coastlines, yeah. Some of them are built on islands as well.
Well, what was going on with the water exactly?
So when you take a look, for example, at the Atlantic Ocean or the Pacific Ocean, is what we're looking at is these vast saltwater bodies. Now, the sodium chloride molecules in there, the tidal flow of that water with the gravity field of the Earth being affected by the orbit of the moon, this then creates the piezoelectric effect. In other words, there is minuscule but consistent amounts of piezoelectricity in saline water or salt water. Now, when it comes to the actual Tartarian architecture, if some of the star forts were actually designed with Tartarian architecture, what we're looking at here, therefore, is the usage of sacred geometry in the overall design of these star forts, which would effectively make them a type, if you like, of etheric storage unit or etheric electrical unit. And so the actual lapping of salt water or saline water from the Atlantic Ocean or the Pacific Ocean or one of the seas of planet Earth, lapping against the actual geometrically designed star forts that were constructed originally in some cases with specific types of rock or stone that had a much higher crystallic based content within them. This then optimized the absorption of that piezoelectric effect with the water constantly moving against the actual design of those star forts that were created with sacred geometry and also built on intersections a lot of the time of geomagnetic ley lines. So there's another interconnection with literally the boundless transmissions and receptions of telluric electricity. So the exact technical principles behind how that would have functioned in the star forts isn't fully understood as a form of occult technology. But we know that some of these coastal buildings had the ability to literally accumulate. In effect, the star forts had the ability to accumulate as, for want of a better phrase, an etheric capacitor, huge amounts of piezoelectricity from the salt water of the aquatic environments around them. That's kind of pretty much the best description I can really give in terms of understanding how piezoelectric absorption and then transmission could have taken place. So in these star forts, it was therefore likely, and again, this is all theoretical, that there was possibly transmitters. So some type of aerials or antennae that were metallic, and these would have been able to transmit the accumulated piezoelectricity that had accumulated within the star forts to other locations that would have been inland, that were part of Great Tartaria and the Old World Order.
Now, they're all explained to be built between the 16th and 19th century, but from what we looked into, and you're looking at the design of these, some of these would have been very difficult to build at that time. So it's almost that maybe they were actually built repurposed in a way, right? So
Yes.
there's not it's not a complete lie that some of these were used as defense bastions, or in the sense of used in the Civil War in America and various other
Well, they
parts of
were called
history.
Bastion Forts. Some of them were called Bastion Forts. And I think the logical approach that has to be taken here is not to really get into disputing whether some of the star forts were actually constructed, say, in the Georgian period or the Victorian age. They were constructed for naval defensive purposes or as bastion forts or not. One of the main issues when it comes to looking at Tartarian architecture and actually positing the idea that some of these star forts could have possibly been constructed at earlier dates and then were either demolished or rebuilt at later dates
Mm.
comes down to the fact is there are very few architectural drawings.
Yeah.
There is no aerial schematics of a lot of these bastion forts or star forts. And what you're given is just a lot of the time the reign of a Pacific monarch, the reign of a Pacific prince in a Pacific location. You're not even given a lot of the time the name of any of the civil engineers or the architects that were involved in the overall design of such incredibly vast edifices that have become known as bastion forts, star forts, or whatever. So that has really become problematic. The fact there's no etchings, there's no drawings done in stages over 3, 6, 9, 12 months, 18 months, 24 months, and so forth, of the progression of the construction of a lot of these bastion forts or star forts anywhere on planet Earth. Yes, some designs were actually drawn out. Yes, there are schematics for some of them, but for very large numbers of them, there isn't. And you have to question, well, if monarchs, the rulers of the day, were so invested in the costings of such vast edifices for the purpose of protecting the nation state or protecting
Mm.
their sovereign kingdom against invasion or foreign armies trying to attack and take their resources and away their liberties, you would have thought that they would have celebrated the construction of such vast bastion forts or star forts by actually recording in tremendous detail over that
Yeah.
3, 6, 9, 12, 18, 24-month period the exact progression and development so they could then celebrate that in their royal courts, in their various urban dwellings, and that the populaces would have looked at them and said, wow, that's a fantastic piece of civil engineering.
That is what raises suspicion about the
That's
whole
right.
process of it. And I think the geometry is another thing as well. Obviously, now we've got the ability to see things from overhead with Google Maps and all this.
That is correct.
They
Yeah.
clearly see that this is pretty precise. And, there often were cities built within these star forts as well. So that would make sense in what you're saying.
That's right.
Communities that actually people would, they would harness this energy and almost like power a whole community or civilization within that star fort.
And yeah, I totally agree, and that makes absolute sense in terms of the piezoelectricity being absorbed into the stonework or the brickwork of these bastion forts or star forts, effectively making these vast edifices literally ether units of Tartaria if they were constructed by the Nordic Tatarians and the Turkic peoples. But what we have to remember also is here, what you just touched on the idea of the aerial views in the modern age that we can see, we it's clear that these edifices, these star forts were constructed with sacred geometry. The measurements are so precise.
Mm.
So I will then put this question out there. Was some form of geodesy used? Now, geodesy obviously is the measurement of distances between sacred spaces and alignments, and landmarks and so forth, which is being touched on, I think, before we've discussed this.
In the ley
So
lines, the stone circle, yeah.
absolutely. So what we're looking at here was a similar process when it came to their civil engineering being used, because something like that would have to have been used, because in even in the Georgian period, the Victorian age, there wasn't the kind of technical gadgetry available to
No,
the construction industry to just build these vast edifices on coastal coastlines as some kind of naval defense or some kind of keep to place, soldiers, and to have an armory of some nature, in the event some kind of conflict or warfare was to suddenly occur.
you mentioned the ether in the sense of this, and we were talking about the piezoelectric. Now that's coming from the sea, but what was happening with the ether and these star forts, do you think, or
Well, I
possibly?
think you've got to remember that piezoelectric currents in salt water in the Atlantic Ocean, or wherever, the Pacific Ocean, and even you look at someone like the United Kingdom of Great Britain. If you take the Arctic Ocean, the Norwegian Sea, the North Sea, and down to the English Channel, what you're looking at is a vast amount of piezoelectric effects going on. So that a lot of that discharges upward into the atmosphere. It's not just fixated in those saline water bodies. So when it comes to the ether, there was, as there is now, a constant interaction on the surfaces of the Atlantic Ocean, Pacific Ocean, and so forth, of those piezoelectric currents, as there is as they wash in the tidal flow along estuarine systems to coastlines and beaches and so forth. And so there would have been some kind of occult technology that was used to integrate both the piezoelectric currents that were coming in and the tidal flow of the saline water bodies lapping against these bastion forts or star forts. And as I said earlier on, then a lot of the stored piezoelectric currents building up in these literally vast capacitors, which is really, what these etheric units of piezoelectricity were, these star forts in one sense, could
Mm.
then be literally transmitted via various type of metallic areas or antennae to many other locations, including to other star forts.
They were like modern day
Electricity.
stone circles, right? You'd see them like that in some ways. They
Yes.
had that bit. Yeah, I mean, it makes sense that to some degree.
There's a number of complexities here. We have to remember that the collective psychology of these Nordic Tatarians and the Turkic peoples in the civilization of Great Tatar in the Old World Empire was radically different in terms of how they viewed Mother Nature, how
Yeah,
they understood the motion of salt water. And I know we've touched on it many, many times, but when you look at the inventions of Nikola Tesla and Victor Schauberger,
yeah,
that the psychology of pretty much most, if not all, of the Nordic Tatarians and the Turkic peoples in the civilization of Great Tatar was based around a much more abstract discernment of Mother Nature, of the ether, and therefore the atmosphere around planet Earth, and how we, Homo sapiens or human beings, can interact in an effective and perfected way with Mother Nature,
yeah.
and really use very profound kinds of occult technology to live very luxurious and peaceful lives, much of which, unfortunately, has been lost in the modern age.
And
So
mm.
when it comes
I,
to these star forts, there's this perception filter that's going on,
mm,
where Western science is looking at it from one perspective, but they're not taking into account what went on with Great Tatar in the Old World Order, simply because they refused to acknowledge that civilization even existed. So it's a mute argument to then start considering what other purposes these bastion forts or star forts were therefore being used for, and
yeah,
whether or not many of them were rebuilt. But when they were rebuilt, that was the historic narrative that was placed into motion, stating, well, they were built during 1540, or they were built in 1713, and there
yeah.
was nothing there before that. And then you go and research the architectural or technical drawings, you look at the aerial schematics, and there's nothing there. There's not even listed or credited any architect or civil engineers.
Mm.
You may just be given the name of a monarch, a king, a prince, or something, and
Mm.
that's it. And
Yeah,
there's
and people
nothing.
just accept it because there is no. If we have based the reality we live in on Sir Isaac Newton's theories and concepts of
Yeah,
gravity and all this, and I
yeah.
think we need to understand the ether. We're at the beginning of this now. At last, I
And that
feel
would
this.
include Albert Einstein, so both Sir Isaac Newton and Albert Einstein, because I think this also touches on how Western science is indoctrinated, pupils in schools, students in colleges and universities to view gravity and
Yes.
electricity. So there's a huge amount of errors when it comes to understanding the interrelationship and interaction of what is gravity and electricity. They're very much in one way, pretty much the same thing in
Yeah.
one way or another. They're very closely connected. So this again touches on levitation or anti-gravity. This then touches on other aspects that we've just been discussing on the ether or the boundless telluric electricity.
Mm.
So there's been a complete reframing of how Homo sapiens or human beings view Mother Nature and the 3D holographic reality we define as the material dimension based on the parameters that have been given to us, especially since the end of the Second World War, when it comes to gravity, comes to electricity,
Yeah.
comes to looking back into the ancient world, going back to the time of the antediluvian period. That's before the first Great Flood, the second Great Flood, and then the Upper Paleolithic. So we're given very rigid and very repetitive forms of Western science that are designed to edit out and deny anything else that should really be considered. Because when it comes to any level of intellectual discernment, you should really consider all options. You shouldn't
Of
have
course.
people, or academics editing out one whole area.
Yeah.
We know that Great Tartaria existed as a civilization and that it had colonies that were defined as the Old World Empire all around planet Earth. We know that many of the timelines have been rewritten, they have become distorted, edited, or completely deleted to fit the narratives of the policymakers and the rulers.
Yeah.
So
And
when it
people have
comes,
so much invested interest in that now. We live at that time. We're at a transition, but we're at the beginning of that transition still. And that's
yeah,
what it is so much has been invested on these theories and concepts and the Western science. I think we are going to see a dramatic change in the next 5 years of all this, and it's really in a positive way. And I think it's something that really can help humanity. But do you think the star thoughts were resonating at or creating a resonance of the Schumann resonance, kind of that kind of field of frequency? What was happening there, do you think?
well, there's been a lot of discussion made on the idea that the star forts were producing the 528 hertz frequency that's defined as the Schumann resonance.
Mm.
Now, where that information has come from, it certainly hasn't come from Western science. We could say, is that just being plucked out of nowhere by certain anonymous individuals in the New Age movement and just repeated and put out there on the internet until people have accepted it as fact, inverted commas? We don't know, but we can say that if you look at sacred geometry, which was absolutely essential to much of Tartarian architecture that we see in the Old World Empire. And as you know, there are many other individuals putting out fantastic video content. Again, we're explaining in immense detail on a consistent
But
basis.
also people explaining things very incorrectly as well, as we know.
There is, but there's a lot of disinformation and
Really.
perhaps misinformation to deliberately cause a lot of confusion and academic disorientation,
Mm.
and then that creates a lot of conflict, and you've got all these different egoic mind battles taking place of who's right and who's wrong.
Yeah.
So what we're trying to do is put out a balanced view here. And
Mm.
I will state what this is my personal belief. I believe that some of the Bastion forts or star forts are actually far older than we've been told. And the remnants of the original star forts were constructed by the Nordic, Tatarians, and Turkic peoples as part of their civilization that has been phrased as Great Tartaria. So I do believe that the situation is they were then repurposed. They just built over the remnants of those star forts, where others were specifically built completely from the bare ground up, basically.
Yeah, and I feel the same. I feel there's again this kind of distortion of history, which again, what you said there tipped on it. What it does is creates conflict between people. So it's very hard to decipher and work out what was in these star forts. But obviously, there were certain metals, wasn't there, that they were used within them. So like what and stone and different types of to create these currents, to create this kind of
You would need to optimize any kind of piezoelectric effect. You would need various kinds of stonework or brickwork with a high quartz content
right,
within those substances. And there are, as you know, there's vast numbers of star forts all around planet Earth, but very large numbers of them are just ruins now. They're just rubble, broken stonework and brickwork. There's not really any delineated form, but there are
yeah.
many that are so incredibly precise in their overall built appearance. You can clearly see that sacred geometry is being used. And I think one of the oldest that I'm aware of is Berwick Castle in the town of Berwick upon Tweed in northeastern Northumberland. And apparently it was completed sometime around October 1128. So
Right.
obviously
Wow.
this is during the early medieval period or the Dark Ages. So that's interesting to note. So, if you were to go back far enough and theoretically discover a star fort that was built sometime in the classic period, you would then say, is that a remnant from Hyperborea? Because then
Yeah.
it actually predates the emergence, the political state of Great Tartaria. So that's interesting
And
to
we're
note
back
also.
to that time again with the Dark Ages. Really, so much was deleted and God disappeared and reshaped at that time. So
Yeah, that's
anything
absolutely
built in that
correct.
time is yeah. And I just feel, looking at star forts, but yeah, there are quite a few in Britain, and the Berwick Castle one is particularly interesting.
That's
And
right. It is.
that's
Yeah.
at the point where the North Sea is, and you would obviously
Yes.
have the Norwegian Sea next to that. So there's
Mm.
definitely something happening there.
We just stick with the United Kingdom of Great Britain. You've got Langard Fort, which was originally known as Langer Fort in the town of Felixstowe in southeastern Suffolk. This was apparently completed around February of 1540, so that was during the Elizabethan period. So that's another one to. Then
And
you
that's all
obviously
down on the East Coast, isn't it? That's again
East
on
Anglia. Yeah,
East
that's the
Anglia
East.
onto the
Yeah.
North Sea. Yeah.
Yeah, Felixstowe's right up on the coastline of the North Sea. So you've got Tilbury Fort, which is also known as Thermitage Bulwark, and the West Tilbury Blockhouse. This was built in the port town of Tilbury in South Essex, apparently completed around September 1532. So that was during the reign of King Henry Tudor VIII, I believe.
Oh, King Henry VIII.
Yeah, and then you've obviously got Deal Castle in the town of Deal,
Yeah.
down in the South Kent area. Apparently completed by about March 1536. So again, that's during the Tudor period under King Henry Tudor VIII. So again, there was obviously a lot of this going on with the construction of the star forts, or shall we say, the reconstruction of these newer types of star forts that were built over remnants, because there's many accounts when you look into these bastion forts or star forts where it states there were early remnants that were found there,
Mm.
and a Pacific king or queen or prince or princess decided they would then build over those remains. The question is, what were those remains? When were they originally constructed? And
Mm.
you find almost no information on that at all. There are no architectural or technical drawings. There are no aerial schematics. There's not even around those areas any kind of carriageway for horses and carts or horses and carriages that, back in, the Dark Ages, the early medieval period, or the Georgian period, the Victorian age, long before automobiles and all the advanced types of electrical tools used in the construction industry, how they would have actually been able to ship some of these materials. They can't all have been shipped
Yeah.
along the coastlines just with sailing vessels, because it's logistically impossible. They would have had to use pulleys and winches, loading and offloading a
The work
thousand
would have been
thousands of
unbelievable.
stonework and brickwork.
Yeah, I mean, it would have been it's so much work. I mean,
Yeah,
and
vast.
even the populations at that time as well were apparently
I
were a
mean,
lot.
you got to remember back, if you go back to say the Tudor period, the Elizabethan period, when it came to conflict and warfare, this was all based on raising local taxes from the populaces, whether it was England as it was called at the time, or in Western Europe, in the Kingdom of France, or anywhere else. So they would, therefore, the idea you could just have vast numbers of wooden sailing vessels that were readily available in vast convoys, shipping non-stop 24 hours a day, all the thousands of tons of stone and brick that would be required on pulleys and winches and hoists. The logistics involved in it are so vast, and the costings involved in terms of coinage in those, those in those times would have been so exorbitant, so expensive. It doesn't make a lot of sense, even if it took 5, 10, or 15 years to construct that bastion fort or star fort. Again, there's a lot of open-ended questions here without any answers. You can see it's quite a mystifying subject.
And one I looked into was in the Gulf of Mexico, and that was the Fort
Yeah.
Jefferson. And I, like you say, yeah, you could have built it with the ships, but again, this was built with 16 million bricks, and it's built out into the water, so
Yeah.
it would not have been an easy task to build this. And this was built between 1846 to 1875. So
Very well.
again, we're
Yeah.
back at that time, a date where
Yeah.
every
Yeah.
part of the world was built during this period of time, and obviously industrial age. Now, I think that would have been impossible. And
Interesting. Well, there you go. So I mean, one of the things that is never really been considered is, below the surface of these bastion forts or star forts was all the compartmentalization with all the different rooms that you had, the storage areas below the surface. But one thing that could be posited was, and again, this is just being put out there as speculation, was these compartmentalized subsurface areas inside the star forts originally designed to actually create some kind of electromagnetic resonance of some nature to do with piezoelectricity being accumulated in the star forts, readying it for transmission to other locations. Again, that's just speculating, but I just see that there was a lot more going on with these star forts than just these wonderfully designed
prisons as well, they were used for
prisons or armories or
designer prisons.
military storage facilities of some nature or another. It doesn't make any sense to put so much money and time and human resources into trying to complete these vast projects when they weren't going to be of long-term use, and a lot of them never were actually effectively used or optimized to any level as naval coastal defenses anyway. So it seemed a little bit over the top to build these vast constructs in these coastline areas. And then you look, for example, at the sacred geometry, and you look at all the different kinds of technical researches taking place into piezoelectricity and saline water or salt water that are going on now, in the modern age. You certainly have to admit, in one form or another, we have to question the validity of what these star forts were used for, and whether a large number of them were actually built over the ruins or the remnants of the original star forts that had been constructed, during the civilization of Great Tartaria and the Old World Empire.
But again, you got the period they were all built in was between sort of like this very 1700s, which we've looked into a lot, and it's a very kind of black period of time, a very suspicious information, I would say, there, or history, a lot of history to question. But
you can see that you can. I just say is that you can see that what you just said there. Two good examples of that is Fort George at Citadel Hill and the city of Halifax, which is in the Nova Scotia province of Eastern Canada. Now, we're told it was completed sometime around June 1798, and then you've got the Citadel of Quebec in Quebec City, in eastern Quebec.
We're always at them dates, and it always seems it's that period again. It's and considering they had immigration going on at the time, you had all this kind of movement around the planet. There was a farming crisis. There was natural disasters, a lot of natural disasters, and then yet they were building these amazing, edifices, these star forts at the same time. Which it just leaves so much to question. It does. The more you look into it, it's not something you can explain in one sentence about this. It's something you have to look into. Just going through a few more, Steve, of the star forts, there was in Kronborg, located a cityscape of Helsinga, or else in northeastern Denmark. Now, again,
That's
that's
right.
down in the same sort of area of where we went to with Britain. So you've got this kind of these star forts that are located around this particular sea, the Norwegian Sea, the North Sea,
Yeah.
and that's
That was apparently built around August 1427. So again, that was during the medieval age or the medieval period. So, again, the question there is, was there older remnants of
yeah,
some other star fort that had been constructed in that area? And was that built over? And is it also the case that many of the bastion forts or star forts that were built during the Georgian period and the Victorian age, were they built over remnants of much earlier star forts that had come from Great Tartaria and the Old World Empire? We're never really going to know that. And again, I'm reiterating the fact that there are very few architectural or technical drawings, aerial schematics, or diagrams, sketches, or etchings of any kind that show the progression over 3, 6, 9, 12 months, 18, 24 months, or whatever, of how these vast naval or coastline edifices were constructed. And really, what should really be shown is the logistics involved,
yeah,
because if they would have had to have used hundreds of sailing vessels,
yeah,
thousands and thousands of
tons of
construction personnel. And I don't think during those times there was that number of people available for Pacific projects to be allocated or to be designated for one vast construction project such as a Pacific star fort. It doesn't make any sense.
I think one of the biggest star forts is the Palmanova star fort, isn't it? In
Yeah.
that's in northeastern Italy,
That's right.
and that
And
was
you were
apparently
mentioning
built
that
before.
as you said earlier on in this Sacred Wisdom podcast, that then became a huge urban dwelling for Italian people.
Yeah,
So the Palma Nova Star Fort, which was constructed in the Udine province of the Friuli Venezia Giulia region of northeastern Italy, apparently was constructed and completed by October 1593. So again, this is in the Elizabethan age.
yeah,
So again, what needs to take place is people need to go and really try and do the research into who the architects were, who was involved in the civil engineering, the actual planning and the logistics of these star forts.
yeah.
But most of the time, any individual research that comes back, and I found this myself, as you have, Zach, is there's virtually no credible documented evidence to show actually when those actual star forts were completed, apart from what we've been told.
Yeah.
And somebody's been appointed as a historian or a chronicler by that king or that queen or that prince or princess, and that's the end of it.
The interesting thing about, and we've mentioned it many times, and when you start looking into this, is that the word battery always comes up within these star forts. So
Yeah,
obviously you had a battery of soldiers, a
that's right.
battery of an army, things like that. But I find that really intriguing, and what that is about. And what's your view on that, Steve? What do you feel?
I think you would be careful. It's not just a play on words. It could just be a grammatic coincidence
Very
that
like
you've
could
got.
be.
Yeah, or it could be a way of the policymakers and rulers sort of basically indicating that there was another purpose and usage of these bastion forts or star forts, and that perhaps many of them had been remnants that were built over with much newer designed bastion forts or star forts, but the original ones had come from Great Tartaria in the Old World Empire. Maybe it was a nod and a subtle indication to that fact. Who knows?
Because obviously everyone attributes it to the Tartarians, and in the sense of you see people talking about this, and obviously, do you think it was just there was Hyperborea, there was all these other civilizations involved in this? It wasn't just a
I
Tartarian.
believe that there were types of or versions of star forts that definitely existed during the civilization of Hyperborea in the Arctic North Polar region. We know that there's vast amounts of archaeological remnants that are now being looked at by the Russian government and in northern Russia. So there's definitely a lot going on that's being concealed, and Western science is specifically trying to ignore all this. And that's a terrible shame because it's not really giving a very accurate portrayal or depiction of how Homo sapiens or human beings lived on planet Earth thousands and thousands of years ago.
Mm,
And what we want is correct historical narratives, and we want serious consideration given to studying the civilization of Great Tartaria, which really did exist. And so star forts existed in one form or another, far beyond the medieval age, the Georgian period, the Victorian age, and then coming into the modern age. So no, I really don't agree with the officially kind of given repeating narrative. And I certainly don't agree with a lot of the alternative media, with all the pundits that are saying, oh, yes, all the star forts were all built and all constructed in, Great Tartaria. It's all a complete lie. Well,
mm,
that's not a logical or intellectual approach. That's very, very generalistic,
mm.
is not based on doing the researches and actually looking at the actual evidence, which is what we do. And I would say, yes, some of the star forts that you see were built over the remnants of much older types or versions of star forts from Great Tartaria and the Old World Empire, but others were built at much later stages, during the medieval period and the Georgian period, etc., and the Victorian age.
Well, you can see where we got to today, that these distortions are not healthy for society, and they
Yeah,
create disruption and problems, and actually what we're doing by basing it not on a complete lie, but we are basing a lot of history on false evidence, and something we're missing. And I think that's part of the journey we've all got to kind of get to, and rediscover, and find this back out and
yeah.
understand this. And I think it will take a little while to get there. We
You
are
know,
gonna. But Steve, I just wanted to ask, sorry, just what is your, so overall, what is your general opinion on why this was repurposed, or why they didn't carry on society? I know we've gone over it before, but just so for the podcast, I mean, what?
simply because obviously over many generations, the civilization of Great Tartaria and the old world empire that had been created from that civilization disintegrated. We've talked about obviously the first mud flood, the second mud flood, the third mud flood, all the volcanic activity, sea quakes, earthquakes, coastal erosion, and eventually the disintegration of Great Tartaria in northern Russia, and
Yeah,
then eventually through the various colonies on planet Earth, many of which were obviously in the United States of America and Canada, as with here in the United Kingdom of Great Britain and across mainland Europe, by various kings and queens, princes and princesses, and eventually, Tartaria basically disappeared from history. And that's the way I look at it. It wasn't one event that happened or a single, intensely profound event, and it was all gone.
mm,
This was an incremental process over many generations. I mean, when we understand, what ether is, or this boundless telluric electricity, it's very much integral to the existence of Homo sapiens or human beings on planet Earth, and the actual the really ensuring that our medical and biological health is optimized, because really a lot of the time it's to do with electricity. It's to
mm,
do with literally the energetic resonances of existing here on planet Earth in these
mm,
condensed vibrations, and the ether and therefore the atmosphere around planet Earth is very, very important. And this was very much understood in Great Tartaria in the Old World Empire.
mm.
It was even understood amongst the white giants of North America, who were really very closely connected to Great Tartaria, as we know that the white giants were in northern Russia.
But yeah, no, no, it's true, Stephen. You can see the deletion of these civilizations, and it still goes on today. You've got
Yeah,
cultures that are gone. Obviously, the latest that is the Aboriginals and cultures, and how they used sound and vibration and stuff like this
yeah.
to
I
it's
mean, all these different tribal communities, they're disappearing very quickly. And it's
Yeah.
not being, and that's not reported in the mainstream media. You're not seeing it being taken seriously by Western science. It's just being quietly done in a very surreptitious way, progressively over many years, and it's been going on for a long time already. And so this is a long drawn out process. And Great Tartaria, was incredible. It created its own kind of golden age or golden period. It had boundless telluric electricity that could be used for heating and lighting, transportation, biological healing purposes. It would have been a truly incredible civilization. Tartarian architecture is absolutely beautiful. It's eloquent. It's mesmerizing in one form or another. It's really quite incredible. And then you look at the sacred geometry used in some of these star forts that we've been told that were constructed during the Georgian period or the Victorian age, going on into this modern age that we're in now. They look absolutely incredible. But we
Yeah.
know that some of them may have been built over the
Mm.
remnants of the older star forts from Great Tartaria and the Old World Empire. And that's all I've really got to say on the matter, really.
Everybody, our book is available, Luminous Worlds, the new book me and Stephen wrote, and amazing research in there. There is a chapter on Tartaria in there, and we will be bringing out a book on Tartaria or the Old World Empire very soon. So look out for that as well. And Stephen, thank you, my brother. That's been wonderful,
That's
and
all right.
your input for everybody is so greatly appreciated. And thank you. So
That's
it's a
okay.
bye from me.
And it's goodbye from me.